It is said that Socrates once remarked, "I know that I know nothing." Whether or not he really said it doesn't matter. What matters is what we take away from those three simple words. They have inspired countless thinkers throughout history to question everything, to never stop seeking answers. One such individual was Aristotle, a man whose thirst for knowledge led him to become one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Aristotle was born in 384 BC in the small town of Stagira in northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician to the Macedonian royal family, which gave young Aristotle early exposure to science and medicine. When Aristotle was 17 years old, his father died. Upon hearing this news, his family sent him to Athens, the center of intellectual life at that time, so that he could learn and continue his studies under the great philosopher Plato. There, Aristotle spent the next 20 years learning and teaching. He became one of Plato's favorite students and was put in charge of the academy when Plato was away. Although he admired Plato greatly and credited him with laying the foundation for his philosophical outlook, Aristotle soon developed his own unique ideas, often questioning and expanding beyond his teacher's philosophy. After leaving Athens, he traveled across Greece, observing nature, studying animals, and gathering knowledge that would later shape his groundbreaking works. In 335 BC, at the age of 49, he moved to the Macedonian royal court at the invitation of King Philip II, who wanted Aristotle to tutor his 13-year-old son, Alexander, the future Alexander the Great. For the next 2 years, Aristotle taught Alexander about poetry, literature, science, and philosophy, instilling in him a love of learning that would last a lifetime. During this time, he also wrote several treatises on various subjects, including poetics, which laid the foundations of literary criticism and dramatic theory. Aristotle also tutored Alexander's sister, Princess Cleopatra, whom he married after his first wife, Pythias, died. Together they had 2 sons, Nicomacheus and Ptolemy, named after his father and the king's brother, respectively. After the assassination of Philip II in 336 BC, Aristotle fled to Athens to escape the suspicion of the royal bodyguard, who blamed him for the murder. For the rest of his life, he avoided involvement in politics, though he continued to teach and write until his death in 322 BC at the age of 62. Today, we remember him as one of the most influential philosophers and polymaths of all time. His work laid the foundations for many scientific disciplines, and his ideas have shaped Western thought for over 2 millennia. So, what made Aristotle such a great philosopher? How did he come up with some of the most groundbreaking ideas of his time? To understand what made Aristotle so special, we need to look at the context of his life and times. Ancient Greece was a world away from the modern world we live in today. It was a time when people believed that the earth was flat and the sun and moon revolved around it. However, despite these beliefs, Greek thinkers were able to make some incredible discoveries about the natural world. For example, Pythagoras proved that the earth is a sphere by measuring the length of a shadow cast by an object at different latitudes. Eratosthenes then used this knowledge to calculate the circumference of the earth within just a few miles of its actual size. Thales of Miletus calculated the height of Mount Olympus by measuring the angle of a star above the horizon on its slope and comparing it to its angle on the horizon at sea level. Aristarchus of Samos proposed that the earth rotates on its axis, causing day and night, and Anaximander developed a map of the world showing its true shape. Despite being wrong about many things, Greek thinkers were able to make some very accurate predictions about our world. So how did they do it? Well, it's simple. They observed the natural world around them and came up with their own theories based on what they saw. This was the scientific method, and it's still used today to discover new things about our world. Now fast forward to ancient Athens, where we meet Plato, one of the most famous philosophers of all time. Plato was a student of Socrates, who himself was a great thinker and teacher. But sadly, we don't have any written works from Socrates because he lived before writing was invented. Plato, on the other hand, left behind a huge body of work that has survived to this day. He wrote about everything from politics and religion to ethics and aesthetics. But Plato wasn't just a writer. He was also a teacher, and he founded the Academy, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. Here, he taught a group of selected students who were interested in philosophy and the pursuit of knowledge. One of his most famous students was Aristotle, who went on to become one of the most influential philosophers of all time. Now, let's talk about Aristotle's contributions to philosophy. He was a true polymath, having studied everything from physics and biology to ethics and politics. But perhaps his most famous contribution is his theory of forms. According to Aristotle, the physical world we see is just a reflection of a higher reality, a world of forms. These forms are perfect and eternal, and they exist in a realm beyond our own. For example, the form of beauty is perfect beauty, which can only be found in the realm of forms. Anything beautiful in the physical world is just a reflection of this perfect form. Another important contribution by Aristotle was his emphasis on logic and reason. He believed that we should use our reason to understand the world around us, rather than just relying on our senses. He developed a system of syllogisms, which are logical arguments that can be used to reach conclusions based on premises. For example, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This system of logic is still used today to argue and debate, but Aristotle's contributions to philosophy don't end there. He also wrote about ethics, politics, poetry, and even comedy. His Nicomachean Ethics is one of the most important works on ethics ever written, and it discusses topics such as happiness, virtue, and justice. He also wrote about the best form of government and the ideal citizen. Aristotle's ideas have had a profound impact on Western thought and culture. His works have been read and studied by some of the greatest minds in history, including Thomas Aquinas, John Locke, and Karl Marx. His ideas can be seen in the art, literature, and music of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Even today, his ideas are relevant and influential. Many of his ideas about ethics and politics are still debated today, and his views on happiness and the good life are as relevant now as they were when he first wrote about them. So what can we learn from Aristotle? First and foremost, he was a master of observation. He was able to make some of the most groundbreaking discoveries in science by simply observing the natural world around him. He also developed a system of logic that is still used today to argue and debate. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars such as Avicenna and Averroes translated, preserved, and expanded upon his writings. They studied his works on logic, medicine, and natural philosophy, and built entire schools of thought influenced by his ideas. Through their efforts, Aristotle's knowledge reached medieval Europe, where it became the foundation of intellectual and scientific life. During the Renaissance, European thinkers rediscovered Aristotle with new passion. His writings on ethics, politics, and science became central in universities, inspiring scholars to question, to analyze, and to seek truth through reason and observation. The Renaissance revival of Aristotle's philosophy helped spark an age of exploration, discovery, and scientific advancement. Even in modern times, Aristotle's impact remains visible. In biology, he was among the first to classify living beings. In physics, he asked fundamental questions about motion and the nature of the universe. In logic, his system of reasoning became the model for critical thought. For over 2,000 years, these contributions guided scientists and philosophers as they built the foundations of our modern world. Before Alexander the Great was a legend, he was just a kid, the son of King Philip II of Macedon and his new bride, Olympias. At first glance, their union seemed unlikely. Philip was a coarse soldier who had wed 4 times before. Olympia was a 20-year-old princess from Epirus with a fiery spirit. But from this unlikely pair came the most famous son in history. And from the moment he could walk, everyone knew Alexander was destined for greatness. But no one foresaw the role that one man would play in shaping the future king's mind. In 343 BC, Philip II sent for him, summoned him to be the private tutor for his young son. When they first met, the boy was only 13 years old, too young for formal instruction. So Aristotle spent the first 2 years simply entertaining him. He told stories, played games, and took him on hunts. But even then, he was careful to shape the young prince's character. One time, he unleashed poisonous snakes into the royal bath, and when the guards panicked and fell victim to poisonous bites, he calmly applied a remedy made of vinegar and water, saving their lives. As a reward, King Philip gave him an estate on the royal land and a small fleet of ships, allowing him to live like nobility. But Aristotle never forgot his roots. Every morning at dawn, he would jump into the sea and swim to shore, so he could jog back to the palace. He kept his body strong because he planned on accompanying Philip on war campaigns. When Philip marched his army south to conquer Thebes, Aristotle went along, setting up camp beside him. But it wasn't all excitement and glory. There were nights around the campfire, when the men would talk about the meaning of courage, justice, and virtue, the nature of the universe, and the gods. Those were the moments that shaped Alexander. It wasn't until the boy was 14 that Aristotle began his formal education, beginning with reading Homer. He taught him the Iliad and the Odyssey when he was young. Philip asked him to tutor his other sons, but those lessons didn't last long. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated at his daughter's wedding. Suddenly, young Alexander became King Alexander III of Macedon, and all eyes were on his former tutor. Would he continue working for the crown or forge his own path? Alexander was only 20 when he ascended to the throne, yet he was already a brilliant commander. At age 16, he had led a coalition of Greek forces against the Persians. Now that he was king, he wanted to finish what his father started, conquering the Persian Empire once and for all. With his friend and mentor by his side, he raised a great army and marched east. They fought their way through Anatolia, then along the coast of Asia Minor. But as they approached the Halys River, they were met by the full force of the Persian army. Under the command of King Darius III, it was the biggest battle Alexander would fight in his entire life. His heavy infantry faced down Darius' war elephants, broke through the center of the line, and chased him across the field. It was a total rout, yet Darius escaped and rallied again. Alexander crossed the river Granicus and fought the Persians for a second time. This time he was wounded. He took an arrow in the chest, but he stayed in the fight until the Persians were routed. By now, Alexander was a legend. All over the empire, people whispered tales of his valor, bravery, and strategic genius. Meanwhile, Aristotle ran the kingdom like a well-oiled machine. Even though he preferred teaching to ruling, he rose to the occasion and showed himself to be an able administrator. He collected taxes, reformed the coinage, set up courts of law, established post offices, and improved the infrastructure. As Alexander continued his conquests, Aristotle served as regent, moving back and forth between Susa and Babylon. For 8 years, they ruled as a team until Alexander abruptly fell ill and died. At only 32, some say he was poisoned, but that has never been proven. What is known is that after Alexander's death, Athens turned on Macedonia with a vengeance. They blamed King Philip for starting the Peloponnesian War, and now they wanted revenge on his son. In 323 BC, Aristotle slipped out of the city, escaping the mob with nothing but the clothes on his back. He left behind his fortune, his books, even his notes on natural history, and settled in the coastal town of Chalcis. There he lived modestly, relying on friends to send him food and supplies. He spent his days studying nature, collecting specimens and categorizing them according to their characteristics. He observed fossils and declared that ancient creatures still lived in distant seas. He dissected animals to understand how they worked, planted trees to study growth rings, categorized gemstones based on their composition. But Athens still smoldered with anger. They refused to let go of the past, and soon they came for Aristotle's friend, Alexander's half-brother, Cassander. He was a general, a war hero, but to Athens, he was a Macedonian. They accused him of plotting to overthrow the government and sentenced him to death. But the real power was in the hands of Ptolemy, who controlled the Egyptian province. He aligned himself with Cassander, and together they marched on Athens. Aristotle was in his library when he heard the news, and he couldn't believe it. Twice now, Athens had purged itself of its enemies. Once they had killed Socrates, and now they were driving away philosophy. It hurt him deeply, but he understood that there was nothing he could do to change their minds. That's when he packed his things, left Chalcis, and moved to the Lyceum, a villa he owned near the city of Athens. Here he established a school, a place where he could teach and train the next generation of philosophers. But unlike other schools, he didn't lock his students in a classroom. Instead, he taught while walking, hence the name, peripatetic teaching. His lectures covered nearly every subject: logic, politics, ethics, poetry, biology, physics, astronomy. He taught that the Earth was a sphere, that it rotated on its axis and revolved around a central fire. He described the composition of the human soul and argued that happiness was the ultimate goal of human existence. It didn't matter if you were a farmer, a merchant, a politician, a king. Your purpose was to live a virtuous life and find inner peace. He taught all this to a diverse group of students, some of whom went on to lead entire nations. One of the most famous was Theophrastus, who succeeded Aristotle as head of the Lyceum and wrote the first scientific treatise on botany. Another student was Calenus, who tutored Alexander's son, Alexander IV. There were dozens more like them, scattered throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, spreading Aristotle's teachings far and wide. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the Lyceum. Most of our knowledge comes from letters written by Roman philosopher Pliny the Younger. We do know that Aristotle had a garden with a zoo and an observatory, and that he entertained visiting scholars from all over the world. We also know that he attracted controversy with his views on politics, and that he clashed with the Stoics over their rigid worldview. Still, he managed to spend more than 20 happy years at the Lyceum, until his students came to him with grave news. Cassander had died, Ptolemy had taken control of Egypt and was declaring himself pharaoh. Antipater was marching on Athens with an army. Soon, the Macedonian flag flew over the Acropolis, and all of Aristotle's books were confiscated and burned. He tried to save his manuscripts, but the mob wouldn't let him. They charged him with impiety and ordered him to leave Athens. This time, he didn't run. He walked calmly out of town with only his cloak and sandals, leaving behind his work, his home, and his life savings. He never looked back. According to Plutarch, he said, "I will not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy." He spent his remaining days in the village of Chalcis, living on what little money he had left, and writing whatever he could remember. He finished his book on rhetoric, composed his treatise on virtue, and completed his analysis of the works of Homer. Sadly, these books have all been lost to history. What we know today comes from his surviving manuscripts, most of which were saved by his student, Theophrastus. In all, Aristotle wrote around 700 treatises, but only 35 survived. What makes that remarkable is that they form the foundation of Western science and philosophy. His method of observation and classification changed the way we think about the world. His definition of rhetoric laid the foundation for public speaking. His works on politics influenced every constitution in Europe. His idea of the golden mean-shaped religion, art, literature, music, his ideas have been used to justify wars and revolutions, to establish churches and burn witches. For more than 2,000 years, Aristotle was the greatest mind in Western civilization, the ideal of a perfect leader. Some called him the father of science. Others called him the master of those who think. All we know is that he was a teacher who believed that knowledge could change the world. That's why we tell his story today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Great Minds and Leaders for more inspiring biographies. See you next time.